So we're starting 1.3 in this video. There it is. So you can look at your purple boxes in your textbook for all of the official rules. I'm confident that you're all familiar with PEMDAS, and you can probably tell that I changed that P to a G because I prefer the phrase for a grouping symbol. And it'll make more sense when I get to it, but you're probably familiar with just saying parentheses, which is true. Parentheses goes before exponents, then multiplication, division, go left to right, addition, subtraction, go left to right. But some students are confused on, is absolute value a grouping symbol, or is that considered a parenthesis? And it is. And that's why I prefer the G for a grouping symbol. So if you see something like, I don't know, like 2 times 3 minus 5, I've seen students try to multiply because they don't consider the parenthesis, or I should say the absolute value being a grouping symbol or a parenthesis. So in this problem, you want to make sure, I might as well do this. You do 3 minus 5 first, which is -2. Then absolute value that, 2 times 2, which gives you an answer of 4. And another reason why I like the phrase grouping symbol is I've seen students get confused if you have a square root that goes over everything, because there's no parentheses here. But technically, since the square root goes over everything, you have to do 9 minus 5 first and then square root. Another example that's pretty common is if you were to see a division problem, let's say 9 minus 5 over 5 minus 4. Some people try to divide before subtracting, but they're implied to be parentheses on top and bottom. So here's just a couple more examples of why I prefer grouping symbols over parentheses. And maybe that makes a little bit more sense to you after seeing that. So anyway, I don't have any problems with you just using a calculator, but this is a problem in the book. I think they just want you to practice understanding that if you add 2 negatives together, you get a more negative answer, -8. Adding a negative is the same thing as subtracting. 5 minus 8 is -3. By the way, if I go too fast, feel free to pause the video, double check if you understand, and please reach out to me if you get confused. Here's another example that has 2 negatives, so we're getting more negative. 0.2 plus 0.9 is 1.1, and then carrying that 1 over, you get -8.1. I think what they're trying to get at with this one is if you don't have a calculator, to get the same denominators. And I'm sure you're familiar with this, but if not, the common denominator is 5 times 3 is 15. So then 3/5 with the denominator of 15 is 9/15. The negative is still there. 3/5 is multiplying, I said that wrong, but you'll forgive me. 3 times 5 gives you this, so 10/15 reduces. And then adding that together gives you 1/15 as that final answer. And here's another one where you don't necessarily have to multiply them together. You can just change the left fraction to be a denominator of 22. And that's by doubling it. So that would be -10 20-seconds plus 3 20-seconds is -7 20-seconds. Again, feel free to use a calculator. Nothing wrong with that. So subtraction, 3 minus 11, that's -8. -6 minus -3, this becomes -6 plus 3, which equals -3. -7 minus 5 is -12. I've seen teachers actually teach all of this with number lines. I'm not going to do that. So 4.2, this becomes plus 3.5. 2 plus 5 is 7. 4 plus 3 is 7. So 7.7 there. Here's another one where you want to get the same denominator. So the denominator, common denominator being 21. So 7 times 3, so 5 times 3. 3 times 7, so 1 times 7. And you get your answer, -5 minus 7 is -22. 21's, that's a weird word. 3 minus 1.2 is 1.8. And then we just learned this in section 1.2 when the English language is confusing. So 9 from 2 is the same thing as 2 minus 9. So that's -7. You'll see some of those in your homework. More simplification, just addition, subtraction, you go left to right. So the AS in GEMDIS, you go left to right. So it's not always adding before subtracting. Now, this first one is because you do 13 plus 5 first. So that's 18 minus 6, and you get 12. But this one you want to do left to right. You do -2 first, so that's -8 plus 4, which gives you -4. Just more multiplication. Again, feel free to use a calculator. Just make sure you're getting the right answers. A negative times a positive is negative. 5 times 3 is 15. When I multiply by a fraction, I just multiply into the numerator. So a negative times a negative is positive. So do 7 times 1 and then divide by 14. So 7 times 1 is 7/14, which reduces to 1/2. A positive times a negative is a negative, 10.2. Anything times 0 is 0. Here's another one that if you're unfamiliar with multiplication with fractions, you do numerator with numerator, so that would be -8. -1 times 8 is -8. 4 times 13 is 52. And then both these numbers are divisible by 4. I do like fractions, by the way. If you change your answer to a decimal, I won't mark it wrong, but I'm just pointing that out. So you get -2/13 as letter E's answer. So this one I would just multiply left to right. 6 times -1 is -6, times -2 is +12, times 3 is 36. And then this one, same thing. And positive times a negative is negative. 5 times 0.3 is 1.5. And then 5 times 2 is 10, but don't forget about that 1.5, so it's -11.5. Moving on to the next section, exercise 5, is division. I do prefer writing it as a fraction. So -16 divided by 8 is -16 divided by +8 is a negative answer, 2. Negative over negative is positive. 5 divided by 3 is 15. Now this one, you might be familiar with the phrase keep, switch, flip. If you divide by a whole number, that's the same thing as multiplying by its reciprocal. Dividing by 4 is the same thing as multiplying by 1/4. And then it might make perfect sense, as I explained earlier, to do numerator with numerator, denominator with the denominator, and then reduce that to be -1/6. Again, feel free to use a calculator. Let's see. A positive divided by a negative for letter D is a negative. 54 divided by 9 is 6. And here's another one where, okay, well, negative divided by a negative is positive. And do your keep, switch, flip. Dividing by a fraction is the same thing as multiplying by its reciprocal. Numerator with numerator, denominator with denominator, and this does reduce to 1/9, because both those are divisible by 4. And then 0 divided by anything is 0. Now be careful. I'm just changing colors, because what if I switch that? -7 divided by 0. Be careful, because dividing by 0 is undefined. And we talked about it in the 1.2 video. You might see me write it like this. The empty set. There's no solution when you divide by 0. Oops, I wrote that wrong. Let me fix that. The empty set. There we go. Looks like this. Or you can write out undefined. Throwing in some exponents for you. Remember, exponents means repeated multiplication. So this is 2 times 2 times 2. 2 3 times. That equals 8. So squaring means 1 times 1, which is 1. 3 times 3 is 9. Now be careful when we throw in just negatives and with parentheses. because the order of operations tells you to do the exponent first. So it's 12 times 12 and then the negative of this. So it's negative 144. Whereas the grouping symbol for letter D is telling you to do negative 12 times negative 12. So a negative times a negative gives you positive. So the parentheses for sure matter. Look, the answer to C was negative, and the answer to D was positive. Again, play with your calculator, see if you understand that. So letter E means the negative of 4 times 4 times 4. So that's negative 64. Whereas this one, we have negative 4 times negative 4 times negative 4. Well, negative times a negative is positive. Times this negative, it's still negative 64. So think about why the parentheses didn't matter with the odd exponent. And it did matter when you had an even exponent. Exercise 7, is square roots, which are technically exponents. So let me jot that down. These are technically exponents in our GEMDAS because the square root of 49 is 7. When you square root a fraction, you do each piece individually. The square root of 1 is 1. The square root of 16 is 4. So the square root of 64 is 8. And then you still have a negative there. This one, though, is undefined. Or you might remember that there's that symbol, there's no solution. Because think about it, all these other problems is what times itself gives you 49, or what times itself gives you 16. Well, what times itself will give you 64? There's no possible answer because a negative times a negative is positive. So that's not possible. Letter E is 10. So exercise 8 is saying, well, what times itself 3 times will give me 64? And there's a way to use your calculator for this. But yeah, it's 4. Now, with an odd root, it's okay to be negative because you can do negative 1 times negative 1 times negative 1 times negative 1 times negative 1 will still give you a negative 1. And so we're good there. And then the fourth root of 10,000 is 10. So play around with your calculator, see if you get my answers to match up. Reach out to me if you're still confused. And then we're throwing into the GEMDAS, which you are probably familiar with. So make sure you do grouping symbols first, then exponents, multiplication, division, left to right, addition, subtraction, left to right. So in this problem, you have to multiply first. 3 times 4 is 12, and then do 14 minus 12, which is 2. So letter B, you do your grouping symbol first. That gives me negative 3. And then you square next, so your exponent is next. Negative 3 squared is 9. And then you multiply by 3. There's an implied multiplication there to get 27. So here's another one where you have implied grouping symbols, a group on top and a group on bottom. So absolute value of the negative 5 first, which is 5. Squared is 25. Add 4 next is 29. Then on bottom, do the square root of 4, which is 2. Minus 3 gives me negative 1. And then divide. So division is the last thing on this one. And that's just negative 29. Don't forget, brackets are also parentheses. So as we simplify exercise 10, you want to do inside the brackets first, which inside the brackets is also parentheses. So we have negative 2 there, plus 6 times negative 2. 2 minus 4 is negative 2. And then you multiply 6 times negative 2. That's negative 12. Negative 2 plus negative 12 is negative 14. So we have 5 minus negative 14. And 5 plus 14 gives me 19. Double check with your calculator. This exercise 11 is, again, you have implied parentheses. You want to do 12 plus 14 first, which is the square root of 16. And then you have a grouping symbol down here. That's negative 8. So then do all of your exponents next. The square root of 16 is an exponent, which is 4. Negative 3 squared is 9. 6 squared is 36. and then the absolute value of negative 8 is 8. And then negative 8 minus 9 is negative 17 over 44